Hello sleep lovers, how are you? Tonight, I'm taking you back to the early 1910s. A time when earth mixed with gunpowder, and trenches were as deep as prayer, a time when there wasn't even a republic yet. But that word, homeland, was present and intact in every heart. Our story tonight will tell of the war and the years spent in silence, through the eyes of a Turkish soldier. The hands trembling in the trenches, the hearts drawing strength from letters, and the young people who set out without thinking of return. Before you fall asleep, let's hear together the footsteps of these forgotten soldiers from within the silence. And if you want to be a part of this journey, you can join this channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you wish, you can subscribe to add one more voice to the silence. Now, close your eyes. Let's conclude our journey towards those years where gunpowder, mud, and prayers intermingled. The year was 1914. A war of a scale the world had never seen before was awakening. In Europe, thrones were shaken, fronts were drawn, armies were set in motion. Not just the players, but those who held pens, those who plowed in the morning, even children would fall under the shadow of this war. For the Ottomans, however, this war was not just about land, it was a matter of destiny. A tired empire wanted to stand tall with honor, even in its last breath. Perhaps the newspapers talked of the war, but in the poor villages of Anatolia, even news of the war couldn't reach. People were still plowing their fields, praying if the barley was sown, wondering if their conscripted son would return. For them, the war was a distant echo. Until the sound of a gendarmerie unit's footsteps reached the village square one morning to gather soldiers. And that's exactly where our story begins, in that village. It was a village where the earth cracked, bread was scarce, and rain was welcomed with joy. A place deep in Anatolia, its name written small on maps, but its people carrying great burdens on their shoulders. It was in that village that Ali was born. He was only 13 years old, but his hands were as calloused as his siblings. Because childhood was considered a luxury in these lands. The house Ali was born in was a mud brick hut, its roof covered with straw. In the summer heat, its inside was like an oven, in the winter frost, it turned to ice. That house had neither a bookshelf nor a table. But there was a hearth, always burning. Because in that hearth, not just food, but also patience was cooked. Ali would wake up before sunrise. He would take the goats out. A stick in his hand, a torn jacket on his back. His mother had sewn the patches on that jacket during the nights. It wasn't with needle and thread, but with her very life. His father, Ali, had been sent to Yemen according to the oath he took. While Ottoman lands were suddenly shaken, they needed soldiers even on the most distant fronts. Most of those who left had not returned. Ali never knew his father. His mother would sometimes tell stories while warming her hands by the stove. Your father was a strong man, Ali. But there's no guarantee that a strong man will return in this life. These words were etched into Ali's heart. Perhaps that's why he never spoke loudly and rarely raised his eyes. The children in Ali's village only heard the word war from the adults. It was actually the Sultan's war. Who knew it, who started it, nobody really knew. But everyone knew their village's turn would come one day. Because in every house, there was a missing man. On every street, a child who didn't play. At his table, a father whose name was mentioned but whose chair was empty. Ali's daily life started in the morning with the sheep and ended in the evening with the return from the hillside before finding his son. He would often fill his stomach with cold cornbread. Sometimes there was milk, sometimes he would drink it. Soup was only cooked when it rained. Because rain was bounty. If the soil was satisfied, so were the people. His mother had managed everything alone. Ali's older sister had been married off to another village 3 years ago. Now, there were only the two of them in that house. A silent woman and a child who had grown up too fast. Once, Ali found a piece of newspaper on the rocky ground outside his village. It had a declaration of war written on it. But he couldn't read it. Because there was no school in the village. No teacher had ever come to that village, nor was there a hand that had learned to hold a pen. But Ali kept that piece of newspaper, folded it, and put it in his pocket. Because there was something in it. Perhaps a sign that the world was now changing. One morning, a few horsemen appeared from the distant hills. Soldiers emerging from a cloud of dust stopped in the village square. They had a list of names in their hands. It was clear who would be conscripted. A silence fell over the village. The children fell silent, the women's window shutters closed. Ali noticed his mother's fingers trembling. This was a reflex born not of fear, but of preparation. Because the women of these lands knew they would one day send off their husbands. The richest thing here, whether you were successful or not, was patience. That morning, for the first time, Ali felt something inside him break. His time hadn't come yet, but he knew his turn would come, and when it did, neither his childhood nor the 5 fingers on his feet, unclear phrase, would matter. The war had now entered not just the village, but his heart. That day, Ali's gaze drifted into the distance. Perhaps to the paths his brother had walked, perhaps to those who never returned, or perhaps to a weight he felt for the first time, the homeland. A word whose meaning he didn't fully know, but for which he would agree to a lifetime of loneliness. The wind was a bit harsher in the village that day. There was less bread, but more silence. And Ali began right in the middle of that silence. Ali was a child, but his dreams were as heavy as those of adults, so heavy that even they would struggle to carry on. Because, like any child growing up in deprivation, his dreams were built on an empty stomach and took refuge in a tired body. Whenever a bird flew from the hilltop, he wanted to go far away with it. Wherever it went, it would find sustenance. It didn't beg for bread. His mother would wake to his morning smiles. There were no shoes on his feet, but the paths he walked while dreaming were the richest streets in the world. Sometimes he went to the palaces of Istanbul, sometimes to the deserts of Yemen. Sometimes he was a soldier, sometimes a lost son. But most of all, he was a hero like his father. It was hard to be a child in the village. There were no toys. Stones were toys, mud was plates, sticks were swords. But there was no ban on things that didn't exist, and Ali was most free there. Even if he had no jacket on his back, he wore a cape in his dreams. Even when his stomach was hungry, his eyes looked full. Because his dreams were made not from what he lived, but from what he couldn't live. One day, he was lying in the shade of the tree at the top of the hill. He fixed his eyes on the sky. He searched for its secrets within that blue. He squinted. He hoped to hear a voice in the hum of the wind. But the wind was always silent. Still, he didn't give up. Because children are braver than adults in the face of things they don't have. While the war was discussed in the village, there were things children understood, but Ali understood more. Because his mother had started to fall silent even more. The bread from the tandoor was thinner. Neighbors would greet them, avoiding eye contact. And in this silence, the world inside Ali grew even larger. His lack made him a little stronger. Deprivation made room for another dream. The stars were very bright that night. Ollie put his head down on the straw pile. He lay down on the straw. As he closed his eyes, he whispered, "One day I will go too, but I will come back." And with intervals. Unclear phrase, Hemda Aralaklarila. When Ollie opened his eyes in the mornings, he first listened to the silence. Because in that silence, he searched for a sound. A footstep entering through the door, a muffled sound from the kitchen, a loud greeting outside the house. But for years, that sound never came. His father had stayed in Yemen. His departure had been silent. His arrival never happened. No letter came, no news. Only his mother's eyes would occasionally moisten. When she lost herself in thought by the stove, her hands would tremble. Many children in the village were fatherless, but each one's pain was their own. Ollie had never known his father. He couldn't picture his face. But there was a place inside him for it. It belonged only to him. Sometimes, while grazing the sheep, he would thrust his stick into the ground and act as if he was talking to someone who hadn't come. He would ask, "Why did you go, Father? What was it like? Was Yemen so beautiful that you would never return to us?" When his mother spoke of his father, she didn't use the past tense. "Your father loved apricots very much," she would say. Or, "If your father were here, he would do it like this." As if he still existed. As if he would knock on the door tomorrow. Did she hope? Was there a path that started with deprivation? It wasn't known, but for Ollie, his father was absent, and this absence hurt more than the scarcity of his bread. Sometimes, an old man in the village who had come with his father would tell stories. "Your father was brave," the man would say. "Even in the heat of Yemen, he gave his salute standing tall. He was a valiant man. But the valiant don't always return, son." That sentence stuck in Ollie's mind. His father's failure to return was not a deficiency, but a weight. Because now there was a duty on his shoulders. To become a man by carrying his absence. He had learned to think in his father's place even as a child. Which stone is soft? Which wind will bring winter? He had grown up early enough to understand these things. On some nights, he would lie in bed and pray, calling them his mother's cries. "God, let me see my father's dream. Let me see his face, just once." But the dreams were often silent too. Like the absence of people. That morning, the air was as still as ever. The sun rising behind the hill had painted the village's dirt roads yellow. The women were by the tandoor. The old men were sipping hot tea in front of the coffee house. The children hadn't even started to imagine the day's games yet. Then, clouds of dust rose. Then, the sound of heavy, regular footsteps was heard. The sound of military boots. That day, for the first time, Ollie saw real soldiers. Men with rifles on their shoulders, boots on their feet, walking with their chests out, these were them. Their eyes held the story of another place, another life. Looking at them, Ollie felt strange inside. It wasn't fear, nor excitement. More of a curiosity that started burning deep inside. Will I become like that too? The soldiers stopped in the village square. They had papers, lists in their hands. The village headman was summoned. The men gathered together. Among the whispers, only one word was clear: mobilization. The village no longer belonged only to itself. The states I was upon it. Because war was knocking at the door. Those inside were looking at them. A soldier's boot caught his eye. It was worn but sturdy. He wanted to walk in those boots. That feeling of weight, the sound it made when it hit the ground. Perhaps his father had walked like that too, on his way to Yemen. Perhaps the men whose feet his mother looked at when she looked at her son also had such boots. That evening, the village was quiet. The men talked for a long time. The women were silenced. Ali, however, fell silent without thinking. The sound of those boots was still in his ears. He couldn't sleep. He got up, went outside. He walked to the village square under the moon. He found the place where the soldiers had been. He knelt and touched the soil with his hands. In the dust sifting through his fingers, he searched for the trace of the future age. That night, Ali understood that war wasn't just the sound of gunfire. War began with a child's eyes locking onto military boots, and sometimes that sound alone determined the direction of a life. The dust was now not just on the road, but on his dreams too. Ali had just turned 16. He was considered young, but the war had shrunk the time even for adults. Like everyone else, he had to grow up. The second list that came to the village also carried his name. This time, no one was surprised. Neither his mother cried nor did Ali object. It was as if everyone knew this departure was inevitable. When the day for the soldiers to gather came, the village square was crowded. The women wrapped their headscarves tighter to see off their children. The men tried not to make eye contact while saying goodbye. Because being a parent also meant pride in these lands. Ali knelt before his mother. The woman placed her hand on his head. She murmured a prayer. Her voice didn't come out, but her lips trembled. Ali didn't hear what she said, but he felt it. That prayer would be the only thing keeping him standing years later. All those setting out had no proper bags. There were no belongings to pack. All Ali had with him was a dry piece of bread his mother gave him and the prayer beads his father had left years ago. "Carry this with you. If you get scared, hold it," she said. Ali put those beads in his pocket, but he placed them in the deepest part of his heart. The farewell was actually short because long goodbyes increased the pain. From the village square onward, Ali did not look back. Everyone admired his upright walk. But no one saw the brokenness inside him. His mother did not call out after him. She just fell to her knees and raised her hands to the sky. Prayers sometimes shout. Along the way, there was a mist in Ali's eyes. Not just in his eyes. For the first time, he was moving away from his village. For the first time, he had let go of his mother's hand. For the first time, he was a final passenger, not knowing what awaited him. But on that road, it wasn't a child walking anymore, but a soldier, like his father, and perhaps that day, for the first time, Ali had made friends with his loneliness. Because what is left behind sometimes becomes a person's greatest strength. When Ali stepped into the military, everything around him was foreign. The barracks, a place surrounded by high walls, they called it. It was another world, every corner shaped by orders. For village children with no shoes, this world was both surprising and frightening. The sound of the bugle on the first morning made Ali tremble inside. After that sound, orders were heard, piercing. Turn right, fall in line, don't move. But Ali couldn't even stand in line properly yet. Shoulder alignment, step counts, eye contact, these things didn't exist in his world. The only order he knew was the rhythm of the sheep flock. Now, his being was subject to another rule. Even standing upright was painful. His back ached, his eyes were dazzled. But he always remained silent. Because he knew he would stay strong by staying silent. There were many children there. Some came from mountain villages, some from the plains. They all carried their own loneliness with them. They didn't talk much. When their eyes met, they understood the weariness of the others' loved ones. Not words, but silences circulated among the individuals. The commanders were harsh. They showed no mercy. Because war did not forgive mercy. Once, Ali had been hit on the shoulder with a stick for missing a step. It was painful, but he was silent. Because there was another child crying next to him, and his pain was enough for everyone. That evening, Ali prayed for the well-being of that playful child. The food was scarce. It was cold and crowded. But Ali's table had always been lacking before. So, scarcity was not new to him. Whenever a hot soup came out, he would remember his mother and whisper inside, "Are you well today, mother?" Weapons training began, and he trembled. A child who couldn't even bring himself to slaughter a sheep was now holding medicine. Unclear, likely, weapon, or rifle, in his hand. His aim was not to hit the target. He fired his first bullet to conquer his fear. Then the second, the third. At night, the dormitory would fall silent. No one spoke in their sleep. Ali didn't speak either. But while turning the prayer beads in his pocket with his fingers, he continued to train his heart. He was now not just a soldier, but a heart undergoing the drill of patience. And perhaps the thing that grew the most in that barracks was Ali's courage. Because courage is not the absence of fear, but walking despite fear. Going to the front felt like the ground was pulled from under Ali's feet. After the training ended, they set off towards the east with a group of child soldiers, following orders. They passed through valleys, over mountain roads covered with snow. Every step brought the breath of war closer. One morning, they were inside the sound. The surroundings were quiet, but everyone's heart was beating with its noise. Because that day was the first day of combat. Ali's dice were in his hands. Unclear metaphor, but his fingers were visible. The shovel given to dig trenches was as heavy as a plow in his hand. The faces around were the same. Frozen child faces, caught between fear and defiance. The commander gave the order. Get ready. What does get ready mean? Does getting ready mean resigning yourself to death, or does it mean learning to hide your fear? The first explosion shattered the trunk of a distant tree. Birds scattered, earth sprayed, it was released. Ali's knees trembled, his ears rang. His chest tightened. His hands sweated as he held his rifle. He looked around. A child who was there a moment ago had collapsed somewhere. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. His breath was cut short. The second explosion was closer. It collapsed onto the trench wall. Ali had dug to survive, but now he was digging to die. Unclear. He tried to breathe. His eyes filled, but he held back. The tears flowed inward before they could come out. They accumulated in his heart. For the first time, death was this close, and for the first time, living felt like such a heavy duty. In the hours-long bullets and explosions, it became ordinary, or Ali thought he got used to it. But when night fell and he was alone, sinking deeply, the echo of that first explosion rang in his ears. When he closed his eyes, he saw the memory of the one falling next to him again. He couldn't sleep. No one could sleep. Everyone was silent, and in the silence, the war grew even larger. That night, Ali took his prayer beads. He remembered his mother's prayer. He moved his lips but couldn't pray. He just said, "Oh God." Nothing else came. Because sometimes in war, it's not just the bullets that hit. They target the deepest place of the first tears, and that wound doesn't heal. It just gets buried inside. Ali left his childhood there that night. All that remained was a soldier, trembling but still standing. At the front, there was more hunger than bullets. The unit Ali was in hadn't had a proper meal for weeks. A thin soup distributed once a day, maybe a little barley bread, that was all. The stomach was fighting, but it was fighting a war it didn't expect. The body weakened, the knees gave way, but the duty didn't end. One morning, Ali woke up feeling dizzy. His eyes couldn't see clearly, his heart beat weakly. He checked his bag. He found nothing but dry bread crumbs. The child in the next trench handed him a handful of roasted barley. My mother hid it in my pockets. Sometimes they would chew dry grass they found. Once, Ali found a frozen piece of potato. It was hard as stone, but he put it in his pocket. When it softened a little after days, he gnawed on it. It was like a feast. But hunger doesn't just affect the stomach. When night fell, the trenches became quiet. Because hungry people don't talk. They save their energy. In that silence, Ali would fix his eyes on the sky. "I didn't get full today either, but I didn't fall," he would say to himself. That resilience was more valuable than bread. Some mornings, a soldier wouldn't wake up. He would have succumbed to hunger during the night. They would go to him, say a prayer. Then they would fall silent. Because for the survivors, hunger continued. Ali fought the war not just with the enemy, but also with his stomach there. The homeland meant sharing not just the air, but also the hunger, and sometimes the greatest heroism was being able to divide a slice of bread. While the war continued in the trench, Ali's heart was thirsty and hungry but still standing tall. Because he was now fighting not just the enemy, but also deprivation. And perhaps this second war was deeper. One morning, during one of the rare moments when soldiers left the trench, he was spotted. The sky was gray, the ground white. The snow had covered the place, as if hiding its wars. A postal soldier approached with slow steps. In his hand were a few crumpled papers, letters. Each one was a fee paid, carried from a home, a village, a past. When Ali heard his name, he stood up. He struggled to stand, but he walked towards that letter. There was no envelope, no fancy words, but his mother's hand was on it. He recognized it. His hands trembled as he held the letter. The sentences his mother wrote not with a pen, but with her heart, fell from his fingers, which he fogged with his warm breath. It started with, "My son Ali." The rest was silence. The essence wasn't the letters, the words. It was the smell of the letter. The paper had the warmth of the tandoor, the smell of unwashed pillows. And most of all, the longing itself. His mother had put a pinch of dried thyme inside the letter. Ali smelled it, his eyes filled, he leaned his head back. The sky was gray, but it looked blue to him. In a few sentences, she also mentioned his father. He walked like you too. Heavy but sturdy. They were proud. This sentence entered Ollie like the sun. His friends looked at him curiously. Some approached. Shall we read it together? They said. But Ollie folded the letter and pressed it to his chest. This is mine, he said. Because some words are not meant to be read aloud. They are only felt. That day, Ollie's eyes looked different. When he ducked to avoid a bullet, he checked his pocket to make sure the letter hadn't fallen. At night, he looked at the stars. Thank God you exist, Mother, he said. The loneliness retreated for a moment. In its place came a warmth. The snow was slowly melting. But the letter was thawing all the frozen pains in Ollie's heart. In the middle of war, a piece of paper was sometimes the strongest shield. Because sometimes a child's survival depends on a single line. And on that line was written, I entrust you to God, my son. I pray for you every night. Ollie slept with that prayer by his side that night. The snow was just beginning to melt. The soil in the trench had mixed with mud, making it hard to even stand. Even if the sun didn't show its youth, the guns didn't fall silent. That morning, Ollie was concerned about one of his closest friends, Hassan. They weren't from the same village, but at the front, friendship was cemented with blood, sharing the same pain. Hassan was cheerful. He would describe the pastries his mother made, sometimes talk about his fiancée. He wasn't ashamed to spend money, not thinking about the probability of survival. Ollie loved this side of him. Sometimes he would ask, how can you laugh in the midst of so much death? Hassan would say, we die if we don't laugh, Ollie. That morning, the sound of an explosion came from the other side. The bullets again weren't losing their way, they could search. The commander said, charge. Ollie and Hassan moved together. They tried to advance from their positions, leaving the trench. Just then, a whistling sound tore through the air. It passed by Ollie, and exploded in Hassan's chest. Everything happened in a few moments. Hassan fell to the ground. Ollie ran to his side. The earth was muddy. He tried to support his friend with his hands. Hassan's eyes were open. He was looking, but he no longer saw. His lips moved. Mother, he said. Then his lips stopped. His eyes locked onto the void. Ollie looked into that gaze for a long time. He placed his hand on Hassan's forehead. He could do nothing else. No tears came from his eyes, but another piece was missing from his heart. He picked up a photograph that had fallen from his friend's pocket. It was a letter from his fiancée. On it was written, wait for me. Ollie fell silent that day. When evening came, he retreated to a corner of the trench. He read the letter. Then he put Hassan's dog tag chain in his pocket. The war, for him, took on a different meaning from that day on. Because the farewell of a person who remains alive is sometimes hidden in just a single glance. And Ollie was no longer alone. He carried not only his own life but also the memory of his friend. Another heart had been entrusted in the midst of war. The stars were very far away that night. But when Ollie closed his eyes, he saw Hassan's eyes. He was still there. He was still visible, and he was still saying, endure. The day of war was noise, the night was a deep silence. But that silence was not restful, it was suffocating. For Ollie, the silence of the night was as wounding as the bullets of the day. Because at night, one turns not to the sky but to one's own heart, and whatever burdens are in the heart, they all begin to work, one by one, under that pressure. There were no blankets in the trench. Just a damp overcoat. The ground was cold. Hard as stone. Ollie would lie down, pulling his knees to his stomach, clutching his prayer beads in his palm. But his eyes wouldn't close. Every creak, the hum of the wind, would sound to his ear like a herald of an approaching attack. Bombs sometimes came, sometimes they didn't. But the waiting itself was heavier than the noise of the explosions. Some of the soldiers in the squad tried to sleep. Some snored lightly, some muttered in their dreams. But Ali's sleep had remained in the care of Hassan's son. When he closed his eyes, it was relived, and when he opened them, something was found in the total. Time seemed to have stopped. One night, when the sky was clear, he looked at the stars. Under those stars was his village. His mother. That woman praying by the tandoor. Thinking of her warmed his insides, but his eyelids didn't grow heavy. Because inside, sleep was sometimes a luxury, sometimes a danger. Another night, he started at a faint whisper. A soldier in the next trench was talking to himself. "I've come too, father. I'm here now," he was saying. Ollie closed his eyes. Everyone carried another war inside them, and all nights brought it out. Near the time of the morning call to prayer, Ollie closed his eyes for a moment, but they snapped open again at the sound of an explosion. He hadn't slept. Even if he had slept, he would have woken up in the same place. The bottom of the trench, the middle of the clothes, the edge of death. And at that moment, he realized that the war continued not only by day but also by night. But this one wasn't outside, it was inside. Memories, fears, silences. Ollie recited his prayer beads until morning. His recitation was a whispered prayer. Perhaps, but he endured, he couldn't sleep. Because sometimes enduring kept one alive much more than sleeping. Especially in the midst of war, the retreat. These two words alone made the soldiers at the front heroes. While they resisted in the trenches, holding on to every bullet, every grain of earth, one day the commander came and said they would retreat. Because for the Turkish soldier, there was something written lower than even death. That night, everyone was silent. The soldiers, crouched in the corner of the trench, their backs against the wall, neither spoke nor slept. They had heard stories. Those who were captured, humiliated, chained. Everyone's fear was great, but so was the courage they couldn't voice. Because Ollie had not withheld his prayer all night. He was going not to the enemy, but to prayer. When morning came, the retreat began. It was a silent, swift, broken walk. The mud behind their feet was burying another honor. Their eyes were ashamed to look back. Because a piece of the homeland had remained there. At one point, Ollie and a few comrades were separated. A side road was leading them away from a valley under siege. But danger was everywhere. An enemy ambush could be anywhere, and the smallest mistake could surrender them, unarmed as they were. At that moment, only one thought passed through Ollie's mind: if I am captured, my mother could never look anyone in the face again. Because in the village, everyone knew how each person's child returned. Death was considered an honor, but captivity was a heavy stain. Ollie was not captured that day, but he never forgot how fear persisted, how he walked that fine line between honor and fear. And while the victories of some soldiers were remembered when the war ended, Ali always remembered that fear of flight, because sometimes the deepest wound is hidden in the possibility that never happened but is always felt. The silence when the best voices were cut off did not descend. Thus began a hum spreading through the depths of the Anatolian land. The enemy in every region they retreated from was bolder, more brutal. The towns, villages, and mountains left behind were no longer Turkish, but in another's hands. With each withdrawal, Ali scattered another piece of his heart. One day, looking at a map, they saw how the lands they held were melting away one by one. Like the progress of a product of the day. The day they left the trench, the enemy's footsteps were heard more. Now not only soldiers but also villagers were fleeing. The elderly, women, children had taken to the roads, with their bundles in their hands, leaving everything behind. Ali once saw an old woman setting out on the road, carrying her husband, who could no longer walk, on her back. He felt the tears in that woman's eyes. One day they passed through a ruined village. The hearths were extinguished, the houses looted. There were dead animals in the barns, empty wings in the coops. Ali thought of the children's voices that must have once filled those downpours. Now they were scattered by the wind. This was how the homeland was being hidden. Breaking, shattering, quietly but painfully. One day, someone said, "The best command is taken back, but if it is dishonored, nothing returns." Ali knelt on the ground upon hearing those words. Because the homeland was not just lines on a map. The homeland was a mother praying at a grave's head. The homeland was the soldier sharing his soup at the front. And now the homeland was slipping from their hands. Another day, while retreating, they passed by an old front line. There was a hill near that front. Ali had prayed there once, when he had survived a bullet. Now that same hill was under enemy control. It was indescribable. It was as if even his prayers were occupied. Ali now understood. In war, not only people die. Memories die too. A window of his lost village childhood was closing. The hearth that was burned was tearing the last page of a fairy tale. They had come to the cliff edge of the homeland, and the only thing standing on that edge was the hope inside the soldiers. Ali breathed with that hope, he used his weapon with that hope. Because he had to endure for the day when he would return against the enemy's step. And when that day came, the call to prayer had to be heard again in these lands, united. Ali was committed to that. That winter was reported to be one of the harshest winters experienced at the front. Snow had covered the ground, the wind had sharpened enough to ache the bones. Ali and his comrades in arms had lined up for the noon meal after a long wait. Smoke was billowing from the cauldron. The hot steam spreading inside made them forget the cold air of the trench, if only for a moment. The smell of the soup rose from the soldiers' ladles stirring the mass in the cauldron. It was tarhana soup. Perhaps it was low in fat, perhaps unsalted, but it was a feast for that day. Everyone extended their metal bowl in turn, warming their insides with the steaming soup. Ali also got his soup. He retreated to a corner of the trench. Before he could bring his spoon to his mouth, a voice came from above. "Ali, there is martyr news." His heart stopped for a moment. He put his spoon down. When he came to the top of the trench, the details of the news were short and harsh. 2 people from the patrol sent to the opposite hill the previous evening had not returned. One of them was Murat, with whom Ali had fought side by side. Murat, with whom he had shared night conversations, listened to village stories, shared childhood dreams. Murat, who now would not return, was seen, had become a part of the fragments. Ali collapsed to the ground. The soup in his hand was still steaming, but his insides were frozen. The warmth was only in the bowl, not in the heart. The taste of that soup was gone. Some of his comrades tried to finish their meal, some put their bowls down. Because while food was a luxury in war, the news was often heavier. There was nothing found in Murat's pocket. Choose for my mother. The bird you see in your dreams will be me. When Ali read that note, his eyes darkened. Because it was not warm like the soup, it was cold as snow. And this cold was not in the stomach, but in the soul. That night, Ali wrapped himself in Murat's blanket. He had his own blanket, but he wanted Murat's scent, his presence, to continue on his chest. He sipped his portion in memory of Murat. The war continued, but that day everyone was a little quieter, and Ali was starting it. At the front, a hot soup sometimes appeared just before a farewell, and it was in those moments that one questioned the war the most. Because sometimes a bowl of soup made one feel not the joy within it, but the cold of loss more deeply. Every day at the front was a fight not only with bullets but also with patience. Ali tried to stand tall even when his feet were frozen, his fingers numb, his eyes burning. But there came times when a person wanted to cling not to his squad or his comrade, but to a sound, a prayer. And Ali always carried that sound in his heart. His mother's prayer. When he thought of his home in the village, he remembered the winter evenings, knee to knee, by the stove. His mother would burn what she had so the wood wouldn't run out, trying to warm the cold walls with her hands. But whenever she hugged Ali, his insides would warm. She wasn't with him now at the front, but her memory was, and this memory would be like a shield in the midst of war. One morning, after an enemy bombardment, while sitting alone at the mouth of the trench, he raised his head to the sky. Only one sentence passed through his mind: "My mother is praying for me again right now." That sentence was louder than the sound of bullets. Because Ali's support was neither thick clothing nor crowded troops. His shelter was the curtain of prayer opened by the hands of the woman who woke with the morning call to prayer in a village house. Once, after a heavy bombardment, the trench began to collapse. Everyone was buried. The stone fragments on top of Ali had fallen, but he was still breathing. When he closed his eyes, he heard a voice. "God, protect my child." He felt his mother. As if that prayer was there. As if that prayer had pulled him out of that rubble. In the midst of war, sometimes the food would run out. Ammunition was exhausted. Manpower diminished. But a source within Ali never ran dry: his mother's faith. That's why, before lying down at night, his hands would open, and he would whisper with a voice, "With your prayer, I was safe today, Mother." It was thought that Mother's prayers didn't reach the front, but Ali believed those prayers passed faster than bullets. Therefore, he was afraid not when the enemy attacked, but when the prayers stopped. And if the war were to end one day, Ali's first task would be to return to his village and fall at his mother's feet, and just be silent. Because some thanks are given not with words, but with presence. Just as that mother held on to her son's life by praying for him every day. Ali survived with his mother's prayers, and surviving in the midst of war was sometimes possible only with a mother's dream. It was a cold winter morning. Frost had accumulated on the trench. Shoes were frozen, breaths were steaming. That morning, even the silence at the front had a weight. Everyone lined up in the first row for the morning assembly. The commander appeared in the middle with a crumpled paper. The paper in his hand was not an order, but an agony. His voice was breaking, but he began the command presentation, his eyes directed. "I am reading the names of our brothers from last night's clash." The inside of the trench grew even quieter. Everyone looked somewhere. Everyone's heart was in their mouth. The names were read one by one. Each name was a memory. A voice, a laugh. At the third name, Ollie heard a known echo. He had called that name just yesterday while sitting side by side. Now that name was being read, never to be answered again. The fourth name was someone he had shared a meal with. The seventh name was the soldier to whom he had given his blanket when he first arrived, feeling hurt. Ollie's heart sank as he counted. Each name read seemed to show another star falling from above the trench. When the commander finished the list, he paused for a few seconds. Then he put the paper in his pocket and said only this: "They did not return. If we return, we will take them with us." That word seemed to make the air under the trench tremble. Because in this war, not only bodies but also memories were carried. That day, Ollie copied the list into his own notebook. Because one must not forget. These people were not just soldiers. Among them were a mother's only son, a newlywed spouse, people whose mustaches had barely sprouted. And their names should not remain only on a piece of paper. They had to be carried for a lifetime. When night fell, Ollie crouched in the corner of the trench like a candle. He read the list again. He whispered a Fatiha after each name. When he closed his eyes, each one appeared before him for a moment. Smiling faces, silent eyes, unfinished sentences. One side of the war was the enemy. But the real struggle was to shoulder the silence of those who did not return. Ollie could hear that silence now, and he prayed that no more names would be added to the list by morning. Because the list of those who did not return was the destiny not only of the dead but also of the living. And this destiny was written in the memory of the homeland. At the beginning of the war, the enemy's solution was just a dot on the map. But that dot grew. It advanced. It descended upon villages. It reached the gates of cities. The footsteps of the occupation were not only heard in the tread of boots. They were also felt in the closing of a bakery, in the silencing of a minaret, in the fear in a mother's gaze. Ollie saw the traces of the enemy in the regions they retreated from. The roads were now filled not with soldiers but with migrants. Women, children, the elderly were walking on the roads, their pasts wrapped in a bundle on their backs, and this walk was a silent lament. One day, exhausted, they took a break in the ruins of a village. In that village, the call to prayer was no longer recited. The mosque was destroyed. On the school grounds were mocking words drawn by enemy soldiers. At that moment, Ollie was given knowledge. The enemy was attacking not only bodies but also the soul. Some villages were completely empty. Some had people living, but problems among them. There was a silent desperation in their eyes, hesitation on their tongues. Ollie met an old grandfather in a village. The man kissed him with trembling hands and said, "My son, the land has become silent." That sentence was the summary of the war. While in the trenches, the foot options could now be chosen as desired. The heart of Anatolia was shaking, its veins were being cut, its voice was being stifled. When Ollie bent down and listened, he thought he really heard the footsteps. The enemy was advancing slowly but decisively, and every step silenced a call to prayer. Ended a Turkish life? Before his new clash, when the map command was shown, there was less land. The emptying places on the map were as if pieces were being torn from the soldiers. One night, Ali dreamed of his village under occupation. The houses were burning. His mother was looking for a place to escape. He woke up drenched in sweat. It wasn't a dream. Perhaps it was a premonition. The war was no longer only at the front. It had a defense in his home, in his field, on his street. In Ali's war, he was carried not only with his weapon but also with his heart. Because the footsteps of the homeland were silent but heavy. And the soldier who heard those sounds was resisting not only against his enemy but also against history itself. Because this occupation was not just a loss of land, it was a war of identity. Ali knew this. Therefore, the more he heard the footsteps of the homeland, the tighter his grip became, and one more reason increased until he could say he was here. After years of war, the sound of guns ceased. The smell of gunpowder gave way to silence. But this was not the silence of rest, it was the silence of losses, absences, and change. Ali was now preparing not for war, but for processes. But this time, the journey would challenge not his roads, but his heart the most. The return home. The remaining journey by train took many long days. At every stop, scanning eyes, but no one from his village remained. The plain had taken on an unrecognizable color, even the mountains seemed distant and foreign to him. When he entered the entrance of the village, his feet involuntarily slowed. He looked around. There were no children playing joyfully. The roof of his house had collapsed. Its walls were mossy. But the most silencing thing was the lack of a chimney. That house's chimney had always smoked. It was the sign of life inside. Now there was no smoke. Perhaps no life either. When he pushed the door, it opened with a creak. Inside, there was the smell of earth, but not the smell of the bread his mother baked. Loneliness had seeped into the walls and sat in a corner. He hadn't registered his rifle. For the first time, he felt not unarmed. For the first time, he felt not weakness, but exhaustion. Most of the neighboring houses were empty. Those that weren't were silent. People had learned not to talk much in the war. Everyone had a loss, an empty chair in their house. He wandered the village all day. He asked for familiar names. He received silent head shakes. Finally, he went to the village cemetery. Next to his father's grave, another stone had been added. His mother. That moment was the deepest trench for Ali. He knelt. He did not hold back his tears. He had stifled them in the war, but now the little boy was crying. When evening came, he went out in front of his house. As the sun set on the horizon, he was not afraid of the silence settling over the village hill. This time, perhaps the silence was the news of a peace, but it contained a formation. The type of war. Ali was no longer a soldier. But the chemical war of that day was beginning on the most difficult front. To live again with memories in an unfamiliar house, and sometimes, survival was a struggle greater than the war. He slowly went inside. He set up the stove. He heated a soup alone. He leaned the plate and the writer. He wrapped himself in his mother's blanket, and for the first time in years, his eyes closed, unarmed, silent, but most of all, tired. The war was over, but the war inside him continued all that night. The first weeks after Ali returned to his village were a silent struggle of dissonance. Even though every stone he stepped on looked like the stone he had stepped on before, it no longer made the same sound. The greeting verses of the neighbors also had different stories, different things in their eyes. It was as if everyone had lived their own war, was carrying their own wound. But most of all, Ollie did not recognize himself. When he touched the walls of his house, he noticed the mark he had drawn as a child. A drawing, years ago, had started a game with his sibling. Now, both the drawing had faded and his sibling was gone. The days they had laughed together in the field, built dams in the stream, and swam were now just bitter memories. The greatest wound was being unable to find what remained after the war. His mother was gone now. His father had already passed on, from Yemen. He had bid farewell most intensely to his sibling before leaving for the front, and that farewell had been their last meeting. Now Ollie was alone. That house, once a home ringing with joyful laughter, was now as silent as a grave. The people in the village had changed, time had matured. Children had grown up, the elderly had become even more silent. Nothing Ollie remembered was as it used to be. The neighborhood fountain had dried up, the school windows were broken. Even the call to prayer rising from the mosque seemed to be recited more slowly. Everything was tired, but most of all, he couldn't recognize his own inner self. Ollie's heart had turned to stone. Now he was trying to melt that stone but could find no warmth. Waking up in the morning, preparing food, lighting the stove, it was all a duty. Nothing was hopeful anymore. One day he looked in the mirror. The face looking back was familiar but a stranger. There were dark circles under his eyes, lines on his forehead. It wasn't just what the war had left behind, his soul had changed too. He had left his youth at the front. The person who returned was not the boy who had left. Ollie made a decision that day. If nothing would ever be the same again, he had to chart a new path. But this path existed not just for walking, but for telling and healing. That's why the next morning he went out to the field. He smelled the earth in his hand. Because no matter how much the war changed things, the soil was still the same. It was where everything began. Ollie was an attempt to live amidst the ruins of war. He decided to build a new home, a new hope, on top of those ruins. Because however heavy the past was, the future could sprout from a single seed. Nothing was the same anymore. But this was enough to live for. At the peak of his old age, he now carried the scars of war not only in his growth but also in his silence. His days passed uniformly. Starting by the tandoor in the mornings, ending sitting in the same chair in the evenings. The children in the village called him Grandpa Ollie, but his story wasn't fully known. Because Ollie had never told anyone about his experiences. Occasionally, when a child asked, "Were you a soldier too?" he would smile, pat their head, but wouldn't elaborate. Because he had learned that heroism is achieved not by shouting, but by silence. His war had not been an epic, it had been a burden. And this burden was honored not by being spoken of, but by being endured with patience. Years later, the moment a comrade gave his life in the war would still come alive in his dreams. He understood they weren't medals, they were prayers for him. After the morning prayer, he would sit, close his eyes, and send a fatiha to the names that passed through his mind. Because his reward was ensuring their protection. It was to not forget the names no one remembered. He didn't attend celebrations in the village. Neither the flag processions, nor the old soldier ceremonies. "It's been a long time since I took off the uniform," he would say. But everyone knew that uniform had never left his heart. Because what Ollie carried was not just an identity, but a belief. Love for the homeland. One day, a piece of paper was presented to him by one of the youths. "Grandpa, they want to put your name on the board at school." Ali looked at that paper for a long time. Then he took the pen and wrote a single heroic sentence: "I fought, I existed, I remained silent, but I did not forget." That sentence was, in fact, the summary of a generation. Over time, Ali became much more alone. But that solitude was chosen. Because he loved not the glory of the hero, but his inner peace. What was everywhere? New houses were built in the village, new people had moved in. But in his world, the old, collapsed roof was still, wounded. They set an example for the future only with their silences. One morning, Ali took his cane and set out for the village mosque. The call to prayer was raised. The sky was clear as always. Perhaps that is life's greatest feature of justice. The morning begins again. And just as Ali stood strong in the midst of war, he lived his old age with an equally graceful silence. Because heroism is sometimes hidden not in the struggle against the enemy, but in the struggle against life, weakness, loss, and silence. This is why Ali was a hero. Because he contained a lifetime he never told anyone about. And now, every night when he laid his head on the pillow, the only thing that shone was this: "I went, but it wasn't as if nothing remained." The war ended, and what remained was silence. The villages of Anatolia began to be given life again within that silence. But nothing was as it used to be. The greatest absence was, those who should have remained in the fields, herded the animals, built the homes, most of them had not returned. Those who remained were either disabled or were now silent men carrying their war. The village square now echoed not with the sounds of play, but with the taps of canes. While fighting throughout his youth, he had served the state with loyalty. But in return, he had left his childhood, his youth, his hopes in a future that belonged to his village. He also carried the burden of the village's transportation. Children grew up without fathers. Grandfathers' changing tales were replaced by mothers' dreams. The loss of youth also determined the climate in the next generation's home. Today, the village youth joining the army from the past was not just a military mobilization, it was a loss of Anatolia's productive power, its social fabric, and the hope of its future. These people died on the battlefields, but the consequences played out in the villages for years. Fields went unplanted. Homes could only be built late. Generations fell silent. Thus, one of the most unspoken but deeply painful truths following this war is the loss of the village youth. They left without a sound, returned in silence, and were written into the memory of a nation within that silence. The war was not only experienced at the front. It was felt, hanging, in the homes and households of Anatolia. After the young people like Ali left the villages, those left behind were left in the midst of a great emotional and economic devastation. The missing male individuals from the homes were not just the absence of a person, but the collapse of the main backbone. During the war years, women who sent their fathers, husbands, sons to the front suddenly also had to take on the role of head of household. Women, who had until then been limited to domestic roles, now plowed the fields, tended the animals, provided for the family. Women became mothers, fathers, farmers, and awaiting prayer all at once. This situation was reported as one of the permanently breaking moments in Ottoman society. Children who grew up without fathers, especially male children, either had to take on responsibility at a young age or grew up harshly, deprived of a mother's tenderness. This led to emotional deficiencies in the family dynamic. Children who felt the absence of their country's members tried to understand what the war meant with their childish minds. This new family structure raised emotionally suppressed, fragile, yet strong individuals. Women who lost their husbands in the war often found no chance to remarry. Society's norms saw the war widow not as someone to be given a second chance at life, but rather as a symbol of patience and fortitude. Women's sacrifice was sanctified, but their loneliness was not taken into account. When the war ended, the children who grew up without fathers were now young men, the widowed women were old, their homes were incomplete. Rebuilding the family structure took years. But nothing could be fully repaired. Because this absence was not only physical but emotional. Lack and longing were etched into the walls of the houses. This fracture in the family structure also deeply marked the social fabric in the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic. Women were now accepted not only as housewives but also as a productive force. Children who grew up without fathers became individuals more questioning, more fragile, but more resilient towards the state. The family, the cornerstone of society, received a heavy blow with the World War. This blow was shaped not only by losses but also by responsibilities and silence, completed from the root. And even though the war was over, in Anatolian homes, there was still an empty chair, a silence still sitting in a corner, a place that remained. During the war years, the heaviest burden of Ottoman society fell on the shoulders of women. While the men were at the front, life had to continue with fields unplowed, homes neglected, children left unattended. That is why women were not just those who waited, but those who lived, carried, and sustained. They stood firm with the plow in the field, with the child at home, with prayers at night. The work of women during this period was not limited to just housework. The sustainability of the village economy was in their hands. Their workday started before the morning prayer and continued until they were put to bed at night. Their days passed with the fear of receiving news of a death from the front. But still, they did not stop. Because to stop meant the collapse of the village. Weeks when they couldn't write letters were spent clinging to prayer. Not knowing if their husbands, sons, brothers were alive, they harvested crops, made yogurt, lit stoves. On one hand, they continued to produce, on the other, they kept their hopes alive. For them, life was as deep as the farmer's plow and as silent as the martyr's grave. During this process, an invisible but strong network of solidarity also formed among women. The neighbor of a woman whose husband was at war washed her laundry. Another gave milk to the orphan. Thus, the darkness of the war was somewhat illuminated by these acts of following one another. These quietly performed acts of kindness formed the foundation of Anatolian society's recovery after the war. When the war ended, the women were tired but also strengthened. They now knew they were the main directors not only of the home but of society. They were aware that they had progressed far beyond the roles assigned to them. They emerged victorious from their own war. Perhaps not on the front, but in the struggle for survival. The life shouldered by women changed the place of women in the public sphere during the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic. Now they were seen not only as wives, mothers, or housewives, but also as individuals who could contribute as teachers, farmers, entrepreneurs, even political figures. And all this change was made possible by that silent but profound struggle experienced during the war years. War always leaves children unfinished. In the earth-scented villages of Anatolia, when the World War began, the toys in the children's hands fell to the ground. The innocence in their eyes gave way to a sorrow whose meaning they couldn't grasp. Those children now learned not that their fathers had gone to the field early in the morning, but that they would never return. The war suddenly introduced them to adult responsibilities, emotional absences, and premature growth. Like Ali's younger sibling, many children experienced their brother's departure not with a crowded farewell, but with a silent mourning separation. They put down their toys and started gathering firewood, herding lambs, helping their mothers. Suddenly, in the middle of play, children were considered the pillars of the house. They had to grow up. But this growth came not naturally, but out of necessity. For the children remaining in the village, school was a dream. Because either there were no teachers left, or the children had to go to the fields instead of school. Even in villages reached by the state, education became a luxury with the war. Thus, a generation grew up not with knowledge, but with wars. With silence, deprivation, longing. The memory of their soldier fathers at the front was mostly just a fez, a set of prayer beads, or a letter. These objects became symbols in the children's memory of someone who once existed but would never return. And when those children grew up, they avoided even saying the names of those lost in the war to their own children. Because the pain they experienced in their childhood was too deep to be put into words. The children's confrontation with war was not limited to physical absence. They were also emotionally stunted. Instead of growing up in their father's shadows, they were raised in the shadow of their absence. The fairy tales they took refuge in were replaced by their mother's prayers cried throughout the night. The war ended, and those children, now grown up, could not look back. Because the past was a heavy burden, and the child inside them always remained with those unfinished toys. The war was not only in people but in the air itself. Every young man going to the front meant fields left without plows. There were years when wheat didn't ear, barley didn't grow tall. It wasn't possible for the village's most productive lands to have storage facilities. The women and the elderly ensured that the fields carried the sadness of being unplanted. The soil that had yielded crops for centuries was now silent. Only stones turned in the threshing floor with the wind. The situation was no different in Ali's village. All the young men were gone. In his absence, his mother and young sibling worked the field, but their strength wasn't enough. A field falling silent meant a household going hungry. The villager struggled not only with the land but also with the fear and despair inside. Because even the belief that the war would end had dried up like the unplanted soil. Animals, like people, decreased in number. Many were taken to the front for transport. Some died of hunger. There were no oxen left to continue in the field. There was a lack of wrists to strike the plowshare. Agricultural tools rotted, seeds ran out. The fields showed not only hunger but also the cold of war. The villages showed that the war was being fought not only at the front but also in their industrial heart. The fields came to wait not for seeds, but for prayers. Rain prayers were now not only for bounty, but also for reunion with the sun. Because the land would not turn green until the sun returned. When the war ended and the players began to return, the fields didn't recognize their owners. Ali had almost forgotten the way to his own village. When he touched the soil with his soldiers' hands, unaccustomed to the sun, and used to holding a plow, the very earth seemed to sob. Because it was now a stranger to those who had been hosted by it. The land was left alone. It was the land that most told of the longing for the soldiers and that the war was over. Sowing began, crops were yielded, but nothing was as before. Because the war had orphaned the fields too. The field had lost its owner, and the mark left on the soil by the war was perhaps too deep to ever erase. With the end of the war, the players returning to Anatolia were met not with an air of victory, but with a shy silence. Because among them were not only the enemy, but also the unforgettable nightmares of the comrades they had lost, and a silence that had settled on their shoulders. Like Ali, many young men began to fight anew upon returning to their villages, under everyone's gaze. "Didn't you see? What did you do?" Perhaps they weren't asked directly, but every eye was busy asking these questions. But they carried the untold weight on their backs for years. Because to remember that war was to relive it for them. The remembered sound of a bullet, the image of a wounded face stuck in their mind, brought back sleepless nights. Therefore, many young men buried their experiences inside. They fell silent, withdrew, distanced themselves. Yet, these were the things that most needed to be told, most needed to be shared. This war was not only at the front, there was a struggle experienced by those who returned. Even when they reunited with their families, the pieces inside them were incomplete. They woke up frightened at night, fell silent while eating, forgot their captives. These heroes of the people could not transform. They became more like carriers of memories no one wanted to remember. The greatest loss overlooked by Ottoman society after the war was this devastating destruction of its youth. The state sent their bodies to war but could not bring their souls back. Ali began to see the fears he had experienced again in his dreams. Sometimes he would mutter the name of a dead friend in his sleep, sometimes he would wake up startled by the hum of bombs. But he couldn't tell anyone. Society's attempt to forget these young men, rather than embracing them, caused them to withdraw even further into themselves. The men who drank tea regularly in coffeehouses, avoided crowds, stayed on the sidelines at weddings, they were what the war had left behind, but they were the ignored while living. This state of internal withdrawal had deep effects even on village life. These veterans, unable to form emotional bonds with their families, struggled to convey their love. Many didn't marry. Even those who married couldn't share the loneliness inside them. Because what they had lived through could be described neither with love nor with words. As years passed, the youth of that period grew old. A generation full of untold stories left a legacy too deep to be written on tombstones. Their silence was the war's invisible but most lasting wound. And this wound remained unhealed not only in psychology but also in the collective memory. The pain that Ali and his like internalized might one day be written in books, might one day be listened to. But for now, it just mixes with the sound of the wind in the village streets. Because some wars end, but some continue inside us. In the past, there was hope in the sown seed, but in the first sowing after the war, hope gave way to anxiety. There were no seeds left. Animals had dwindled. The seasons had gone astray. Most of the hands that once held plows were either in graves or lost in cities. Ali stood alone in the middle of his village field. He was resentful not only of the present, with his father's absence, his parents' lack, his mother's silence, but also of the past. But the people of Anatolia do not give up. They went out for rain prayers again. Women hoed together through collective work. The elderly sorted seeds for the young. Maybe there was no bounty that year, but there was intention, and intention was as valuable as the crop itself. Starting to produce was an act meant to feed not only the stomach but also the soul. It was as if it covered the soil of a moment that wanted to be forgotten. The field was the place that made a human human again. Working with the crops restarted the rhythm of life. Waking with the morning call to prayer, returning tired with the sunset. For Ali, this began to repair the balances disrupted by the war. Each season repaired a little more of the destruction inside him. The calluses on his hands now carried hope, not bullets. Everyone who produced again in the village tried to overcome the war environment in their own way. Not only perseverance but also patience, solidarity, and hope came to life again. With production, the women, children, and elderly began to overcome the backwardness left by the war. Because production was not just about filling bellies, it was a decision to live. The state's support was limited, but the people of Anatolia found solutions with their own minds and resilience. Wooden plows were repaired. Seeds were asked from neighbors. It was revived through the tradition of collective labor. One of the greatest lessons the war taught was that solidarity was as valuable as production. As years passed, the changing crops increased, the produce became more abundant. But no one could quite capture the pre-war peace in the truest sense of the word. Because that peace was something that had fallen with the war. But still, they made peace with the land. And this reconciliation was both a resurrection and a silent acceptance that did not forget the war, the pain. When Ollie grew old and looked at the field with his grandchildren, he couldn't get over this thought: everything burned, we thought it was finished, but the soil forgives people. As long as your hands are calloused and your intention is firm. Something sprouted from within a wounded nation, silenced villages, tired bodies. Hope. A fine young man like Ollie, after the war, had to make peace not only with the land but also with fate. But just when he thought it was over, while the nation's burden was thought to be immense, another struggle guide was given in the heart of Anatolia. This time, the war would be waged not only with weapons, but with heart, mind, and nation. And this guide was started by a man who landed in Samsun. Like most of the soldiers tired from the front, Ollie was also silent at first. As the news from Amasya, Erzurum, Sivas began to circulate in whispers in the village coffeehouse, his suppressed pride lifted its head again. This nation did have a master. These lands would not remain orphaned. The nation's independence will be saved by the nation's own determination and decision, said Gazi Pasha. Then Ollie raised his eyes. And perhaps for the first time, he truly emerged. Because now there was a reason not just to survive, but to live. To measure the homeland again. In the eyes of the weary returning from the front, the orphaned children, the widowed women, starting the struggle for liberation, there was a light. That light had not gone out over the years but had been hidden. Now it was time to burn. The hand that held the plow in the field reached for the rifle again. But this time, it was for the protection not only of the present but of the future. This second struggle, given under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Pasha, was the victory not of the weapon but of faith. From the mountains, from the villages, another valiant voice called out. Either independence or death, and these voices made the loud voice inside those like Ollie, who had remained silent, heard again. This time, it was necessary not to be silent, but to take a stand. With the proclamation of the Republic, the generations of war countries now turned into future-building generations. Ali's grandson would now grow up with books, wake up not to the highest voice, but to the school bell. Women would become part of the assembly, not just the home. Villages would produce not only laborers, but educated individuals. Because its thing was its past. Because now the nation's destiny was in the nation's hands. And that is why, when Ollie looked at the sky despite what he had lost in the war, he encountered peace for the first time. Because he knew that its thing had been very difficult, but now he knew that everything would be very beautiful. Good night.